All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And welcome back to the X Zone, everyone. I am Rob McConnell, and we're coming to you right here on your hometown radio, Classic 1220. And you can listen to us online if you're away from your car, if you're away from your home, if you're away from anywhere where you have a conventional radio. Just listen to us at www.classic1220.ca. And the X Zone comes to you Monday through Friday at 11 p.m. Eastern, right here on your hometown radio, Classic 1220. X-Zone Nation, it's a tradition here in the X-Zone for you listeners who have listened to us over the past 30 years to know that we talk about the JFK assassination this time of year. It happened on November the 22nd, 1963. And it was shortly after noon on that day, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated as he rode in a motorcade through the Daily Plaza in downtown Dallas, Texas. Well, joining me now to talk about this is the author of Chasing Ghosts, my research into the Kennedy assassination. And Jim Koepke is our special guest. And Jim is he's a researcher into the assassination of JFK. And Jim, welcome back to the X Zone. Great having you with us again.
Thank you, Rob. It's sure good to be here. Good talking to you again.
Good talking to you too, my friend. How did you get involved in researching the JFK assassination and subsequently you're writing your book?
Well, this was probably in the 1990s, 25 years ago. Mm-hmm. I had a real stressful job. I worked in mental health throughout my career, and I was looking for a hobby. And I looked into a lot of things. I can't sing, I can't dance. Don't want to knit. And I had always heard so much about the Kennedy assassination, so I thought, well, that would be an interesting hobby for a few months anyway.
Yeah, sure.
And so I started doing my own research, and like I said, it's been more than 20 years. But when I first started, I was more than willing to accept the government conclusions that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone assassin. Mm-hmm. The more I looked into it, though, the more I found out how ridiculous that was.
What were the points where you came to the conclusion that this is ridiculous? Come on, what are you guys talking about? What kind of bill of sale are you trying to sell us here? What are you trying to sell the American public? What was it, Jim?
Well, there's so many things. The first thing really was reading the Warren Commission report. It is what its critics say it is. It's very poorly written. There's no index, and they seem to go back and forth. And their conclusion is that Oswald had no motive to kill Kennedy. And, the whole thing with doing a murder investigation is finding out the motive. And they admit right up front that he had no motive. So that just didn't make any sense to me.
Jim, do you believe that the JFK assassination was a conspiracy?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It really had to be because, one of the other things I looked into is I found out that President Gerald Ford, who was on the Warren Commission, admitted in the late 1970s that he actually changed the autopsy evidence in order to make it look like a single bullet hit Kennedy and Conley. I mean, really, he actually admitted he had to change the autopsy evidence. So right then and there, to me, that proves that the Warren Commission was fiction.
If Gerald Ford said that he actually, made these changes, how come this wasn't brought to light and the entire Warren Commission was put under strict scrutiny, as well as the arrest or removal of certain members, including Gerald Ford?
The media has always seemed to be complicit in this cover-up. There was plenty of information back in the 1960s, but the media kind of put a lid on any, you know, questions about it, all the different things that just didn't make any sense. The media was not willing to look into it. They just had no curiosity at all. They just wanted to accept the conclusions and put the whole matter to rest. But so much of it was so bizarre that people kept asking questions and asking questions. And I think what really did it was in the 1970s when the Zapruder film was released. And it was pretty clear then that Kennedy's head snapped backwards when he was killed, not forwards like we were told for many years.
Why do you think that Kennedy was assassinated, Jim?
I think there were multiple reasons. What I found is that, and I had no idea about this until I did a lot of research, Lyndon Johnson was in a lot of trouble. He was certainly going to be dropped from the ticket in 1964. Kennedy had confided that in a few people, and they all came up with the same story that, yes, Kennedy was going to drop Johnson. At the same time, Johnson was in serious legal trouble. I found that there had been a grand jury investigation regarding Lyndon Johnson's crooked background. And he had been cheating the federal government out of different contracts. And I could not believe this when I first heard it, but there is grand jury testimony that Johnson had given authorization for murders for people who were investigating his crooked business dealings.
Jim, how can this go? How can this go on? Without the public finding out? My good heavens! Look what's happening with former President Trump. He's under the microscope. He's getting grand juried, and he's also getting charged. How come this didn't happen in the days of Lyndon B. Johnson?
All I can say is that the media was in bed with the powers that be, and they did not want to investigate this. They would. If anyone questioned the Warren Commission report, they would be publicly ridiculed, they would be humiliated, and if nothing else, they would be ignored.
All right. Let's go back to Lee Harvey Oswald for a second. Was he a patsy? Was he part of this conspiracy? Or was he just an innocent bystander?
I think he was a patsy. He had told the police officers after he was arrested that he was a patsy. He had some involvement, but I just can't believe that anyone would trust him with this complex setup for murder. I think he was used. I think they needed someone as a patsy. Now, we know that he was not a very good shot. And if I'm going to involve him in a conspiracy to kill the president, I'm not going to put a rifle in his hands because I don't think he can make the shot.
But wasn't he a trained marksman, according to the reports I remember reading way back then?
Well, yes, he was in the Marine Corps, and he did fail his first marksman exam. He wasn't a good enough shot to pass it. Now, so he underwent some additional training, and then he was able to pass it, and he became an average shot was his classification. But I communicated with a person who knew him when he lived in Russia. Someone the Warren Commission said was his best friend while he was in Russia, Dr. Ernst Titovets. And Titovets told me that he went hunting with Oswald one time, and they had shotguns. And he said even with a shotgun, Oswald couldn't hit anything. At the end of the day, Oswald had not bagged a single bird. So he was certainly not impressed with Oswald's ability to shoot.
So who, in your opinion, killed JFK? Was it the CIA, or was it the mob, or was it LBJ?
Well, I think LBJ might have been approached by people in the CIA who hated Kennedy, and the mob may have been used to do some of the support work, but it seems to have generally been created by the CIA. I think LBJ may have been approached and asked if he would assist in the cover-up because, if you're going to do something like this, if you're found out about it, you'll be hung. If you're found out that you have murdered the President of the United States, that's treason. You would be hung. They would need Lyndon Johnson. Nobody else could guarantee a cover-up but the new President of the United States. So they very much needed Lyndon Johnson on their side.
Was Lee Harvey Oswald a member of the CIA?
Well, the evidence indicates that he had a CIA file, but when that information was requested by the Congress, the file folder they presented was empty. So there's something really funny going on there.
Do you think it was taken away? The papers within the file were not brought to Congress under national security?
I'm sure that any relevant information was destroyed. You know, people talk about opening up the files. There's, still some files from the Warren Commission. I seriously doubt that there's anything relevant left in those files. I think, anything that would be incriminating has been gone through and destroyed.
I don't think there's anyone listening tonight on Classic 1220, Jim, who was born in the 50s would not remember where they were when they found out that President John F. Kennedy had been assassinated. Jim, where were you when you heard the story that JFK had been assassinated?
Well, I was in 4th grade, and I had just a wonderful teacher, but she was always, she was very nice, but very firm, always in control. One day, right after lunch, she came into the room and she was crying. And I just can't tell you the effect that had on us kids to see somebody who, she was always super in control of her emotions, and she was just crying. We were like, what? It's like the world ended. And she said the president had been shot. And, like anybody else who was alive back then, I will never forget that moment.
When we look throughout history, and, over the years since the assassination of JFK, it seems that there's been other nefarious plots that have taken place, but the JFK assassination stands out amongst most. Why do you think that is, Jim?
Well, I think because they had to involve a lot of people in this in order to make this conspiracy work, but so many people, and I'm sure you've heard this, so many people have mysteriously died. Usually violently killed. A top official in, I think it was the FBI, went out into the woods hunting and was shot and killed. People all the time just wind up mysteriously dying in this. That's how they keep a lid on it.
Jim Koepke is our very special guest this hour, Exonation. He is the guest of Chasing Ghost. And if you'd like to find out more about Jim, or if you'd like to get a copy of his book, just go to Amazon.com. This is the X-Zone. I am Rob McConnell. We're coming to you from our broadcast studios and on Hometown Radio, Classic 1220. This is a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. It's a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. And the X-Zone is now coming to you 5 nights a week at 11 p.m. Eastern on your Hometown Radio, Classic 1220. And if you can't get to your car, if you can't get to a radio, but you do have your iPhone or access to a computer, listen to us online at www.classic1220.ca. We'll be back on the other side of the short break. Don't go away.
More beautiful.
Hi, this is Eric Rawls of Cosmoverse.com, and you're listening to Rob McConnell in the X-Zone.
Hi, this is Blade Runner, and you are listening to Canada's #1 paranormal radio show, The X-Zone, with Rob McConnell.
Hi, I'm Laura Sabrin of Feast of Fields Organic Vineyard in Jordan, and you're listening to Canada's #1 paranormal radio show, The X Zone, with Rob McConnell.
Hi, my name is Lady Ashley, the White Witch of Niagara-on-the-Lake, and you're listening to Canada's #1 paranormal talk radio show, The X Zone, with Rob McConnell.
Welcome to The X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
At the airport in Dallas, and throughout the streets of Dallas, the Dallas police had been augmented by some 400 policemen called in on their day off because there were some fears and concerns in Dallas that there might be demonstrations, at least, that could embarrass the president. Because it was only on October the 24th that our ambassador to the United Nations, Adlai Stevenson, was assaulted in Dallas, leaving a dinner meeting there. From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago. Vice President Lyndon Johnson has left the hospital in Dallas, but we do not know to where he has proceeded. Presumably, he will be taking the oath of office shortly and become the 36th President of the United States.
This is the X-Zone. I am Rob McConnell, and you're listening to us on your hometown radio, Classic 1220. My guest this hour is Jim Koepke, and we're talking about the assassination of President John F. Kennedy on November the 22nd in 1963. It was shortly after noon on November 22nd, 1963, when President John F. Kennedy was assassinated as he rode in a motorcade through Daly Park Plaza in Dallas, Texas. By the fall of 1963, President John F. Kennedy and his political advisors were preparing for the next presidential election campaign. Although he had not formally announced his candidacy, it was clear that President Kennedy was going to run and seemed confident about his chances for re-election. At the end of September, the president traveled west, speaking in 9 different states in less than a week. The trip was meant to put a spotlight on natural resources and conservation efforts, but JFK also used it to sound out other themes such as education, national security, and world peace for his run in 1964. In this edition of the X-Zone, we're using the Wayback Machine going back to November the 22nd, 1963. My guest, Jim Koepke. And Jim, thanks very much for joining us. Oh, it was a pleasure talking to you. In your opinion, okay, millions of people watched in horror as President Kennedy was assassinated. Or shot. At the time, we did not know that he was dead. And as we heard in the clip that I played just prior to coming back to you, Jim, was Walter Cronkite, who was announcing the death of President Kennedy. We saw Lee Harvey Oswald also get shot days later by Jack Ruby. Jack Ruby was a small-time thug who liked to tout his friendship with several members of the Dallas police force. In your opinion, Jim, who was Jack Ruby and what was his part in this horrific event?
Well, like you said, Rob, he was a small-time thug, but he did have connections with the Chicago mob. And, it just seems to me clearly he was told to go and take care of Oswald. And when the mob tells you to do something, you do it. There's just no no options. You have no choices. I very much doubt he wanted to do it, but again, when the mob says do something, he knew he had to do it.
Why would the mob want President John F. Kennedy dead?
Well, that's a very good question. We know that the mob chieftains, the Giacana family in Chicago, Carlos Marcello down in New Orleans, they all hated Kennedy because JFK had made Bobby Kennedy, his brother, the Attorney General, and Bobby Kennedy was clearly destroying the mafia. He was going after them with a fierceness that they had never experienced before, and he was being very successful in destroying them. Now, an FBI informant had quoted Carlos Marcello, who's the New Orleans mafia head, as saying he was going to take care of Bobby by getting rid of Jack. And, that really makes sense. I mean, that's what you would have to do. If he had gone after Bobby, well, JFK would have, continued destroying the mob. But if you get rid of the president, then you control the attorney general, because we know that Bobby Kennedy's new boss, Lyndon Johnson, hated him. The two did not get along.
It seems that there was a lot of friction between Kennedy and LBJ. So why did Kennedy, take LBJ on as his running mate?
Well, purely politics. He needed Texas. He needed the electoral votes in Texas. And if you read the history behind that, you can see that Kennedy had strong reservations about taking on Lyndon Johnson. He really didn't want him, but his advisors at the time told him it was the smart thing to do politically. Kennedy's secretary, Evelyn Lincoln, wrote an autobiography about that, and she seems like a very honest person. I don't think she's the kind of person who would make things up, and she was very straightforward in that book she wrote, that Kennedy really despised Lyndon Johnson, did not think much of him at all, and was certainly thinking of, well, for sure, getting rid of Johnson in 1964, not putting him back on the ticket.
Who do you think Kennedy would have put on the ticket once Johnson was off?
I'm not sure. I've heard rumors. Different people have different opinions, but I think Kennedy was of the mind that anybody but Johnson would be better.
Was there a? I understand that the Warren Commission also did the investigation into the Martin Luther King assassination.
Yeah, that was part of, they called that the congressional, the House Committee on Assassinations.
Oh, that's that. I'm sorry, Jim. Was that the House Select Committee on Assassinations?
Yes.
Yes. Gotcha.
And we know that never, I don't believe was ever resolved criminally, although the family of Martin Luther King did sue the government for the murder civilly, I think it was, and they were successful. The jury did find that King was murdered as a result of conspiracy that the government was involved in. Really, the only person who has ever brought anyone to trial in the Kennedy case was Jim Garrison in New Orleans.
Jim, is it true that there was an FBI flash that was sent to Dallas? Concerning the assassination.
There was a warning sent just prior to the assassination. Nobody seems to be able to trace who that came from or where that came from, but something has definitely come out. Now, we know that in Miami, the FBI had a spy or a mole working with some people, and I think it was organized crime and big business, and they were talking about an attempted assassination. But as to where that memo came from in the FBI, I've never been able to determine myself by anything, and I don't think anyone knows. But somebody obviously knew that something was terribly wrong and tried to do what they could to, notify the powers that be, but it was ignored.
All right, let's go back a little bit. We just briefly talked about the Superior film. Tell our audience about the Superior. Wow, Zapruder film and its relevance in debunking well, not really debunking, but questioning the Warren Commission's findings.
Well, Rob, without that Zapruder film, we wouldn't be here today, because we would still, I think the entire population would still accept that the Warren Commission report was correct, that Kennedy was shot from the back and his head was thrust forward. And, people believed that turkey of a story for many, many years, until the Zapruder film was finally released in the 1970s. And I mean, I remember the first time I saw it, I'm like, holy cow, we've been lied to this whole time, because clearly Kennedy's head was pushed back. And, if someone pushes you, that's the direction you go in. So clearly he had to have been shot from the front. And that was the killing shot. That was the shot that killed him. And without the Zapruder film, we would have nothing to go on.
I've often wondered, Jim, how in the name of heaven this could have happened with all the work that the CIA, as well as other members of the government, including the military services, they usually infiltrate a city well beforehand. The intel is always very credible. It's always, sourced out. It's always investigated. It's vetted left, right, and center. They've done a pretty good job up until the assassination of JFK. What happened?
Well, the person who says he was in charge of providing that kind of military backup was a gentleman from the Pentagon named Colonel Fletcher Prouty. And he says, surprisingly, he was sent out of the country right before the trip to Dallas, which he thought was odd. It was also his understanding that the military people who would have been assigned to, as you say, go into Dallas and check things out, were told to stand down that day, that someone else, we don't know who, but someone else would be covering it for them this time. And now that's really odd, and it's quite a coincidence that they were told to stand down, because like you say, that's standard procedure to involve military in providing coverage for the president.
When we come back from this short break, Jim, I'd like to talk to you about the possibility that the story about the assassination of President JFK may have been leaked to a newspaper prior to the assassination actually taking place. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
All right, Exo Nation, our guest this hour is Jim Koepke. He is the author of a very fascinating book. I've had the pleasure of reading it. The name of the book is Chasing Ghosts, and it's available at Amazon.com. The X Zone is a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard, Monday through Friday at 11 p.m. right here on your hometown radio, Classic 1220. Visit us online at www.classic1220.ca.
My name is Michael Telstar, Canada's leading mentalist from Toronto, Ontario.
Hi, my name is Splenda, and you're listening to my dad, Rob McConnell, on the X-Zone.
This is Psychic Dorothy from St. Catharines, and you're listening to Rob McConnell.
Hello, my name is Holly Reeves, an astrologer from Astro For You, and you're listening to Canada's #1 paranormal radio show, The X Zone, with Rob McConnell.
Welcome to The X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
So you okay. Nobody knows you like I do. And you will go far. Okay. Nobody knows you like I do. You got to love only me. You got to feel only me. 'Cause nobody knows you. Nobody shows you the way.
Welcome back, everyone. First of all, I'd like to say how great it is to be back here in St. Catharines and broadcasting from the place it all started 30 years ago on 1220. Back then, it was CHSC 1220. And here we are back in our beautiful Niagara area. Laura and I are so happy to be back here and want to thank so many people for making us feel right back here at home. And a special thanks to my good friend John Law at the Niagara Falls Review, St. Catharines Standards, for that great article. Thanks, John. Really appreciate it. And to all the people that I know here at 1220, and you know, Chuck LaFleur, the news director, Pete Dichter, the guy who does a great drive home show, and chief engineer. We've all worked together over the years as professional broadcasters, and I can't tell you how excited I am to be back here. And today I was downtown, and people actually read the article that John did. I shouldn't sound surprised because everybody in Niagara reads the St. Catharines Standards and the Niagara Falls Review. The story was in both newspapers. And they were coming up to me on the street and saying, "You're back. You're back." Well, yes, I am. And you know what? I'm so happy to be back because here in St. Catharines and Niagara are the greatest people that I've had the pleasure of meeting over the many years. We've done a number of remotes, and we're going to continue because we are now here on your hometown radio, Classic 1220, Monday through Friday at 11 p.m. Eastern. Jim Koepke is my very special guest, and we're talking about the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And, you know, as crowds of excited people lined the streets and waved to the Kennedys, the car turned onto Main Street at Daly Plaza at about 12:30 p.m. As it was passing the Texas School Book Depository, gunfire suddenly reverberated in the plaza. Bullets struck at the president's neck and head, and he slumped over towards Mrs. Kennedy. The governor, Connolly, was also shot in the back. Now, a lot of controversy. We've talked about the Zapruder film. We talked about motive. We talked about the opportunity. We've talked about the connection between the mob, CIA, LBJ. We talked about so many things, including how Gerald Ford rigged the autopsy report. Now, to me, that is inexcusable. But wasn't Gerald Ford the president who exonerated President Nixon? Remember that, Watergate? Wow.
Yes, yes.
Talk about getting your fingers dirty. My God, Jim. But something that you and I talked about that I really think our listeners should know is that apparently a newspaper story was published before the president was even assassinated. Tell us about that, Jim.
Well, what's fascinating is it seems like the story was written, like you say, in advance, and they had so much information about Oswald. Now, we have to keep in mind, this is 1963, and today I can go on the internet, and in a pretty quick amount of time, I can find information about almost anyone. But in 1963, you would have to do a lot of legwork, make a lot of phone calls, do a lot of research in order to get background information about someone no one had ever heard of, like Lee Harvey Oswald. Yet this newspaper account had his history. I believe it had information about his trip and his time in Russia, all those kinds of things. How did they instantaneously get that? And, you know, it seems like they even got the story put together before the shooting happened. How is that possible? I mean, it's clearly, it looks like things were in place, and maybe they jumped the gun a little bit too early with inserting that story. But we found out in the 1970s from a congressional investigation that the CIA had over 300 assets in the media. Journalists, some of whom were nationally known. So they had these people at their disposal to use when they want to push a narrative.
Oh, wow. It's incredible that all this could have been perpetrated in the United States of America. There were also reports of other people who were seen around Dealey Plaza who were in police uniforms, but when the police did an inventory of where their officers were, these were not Dallas police officers, as well as there were people who were impersonating Secret Service agents. This had to be well coordinated, well in advance. Was anybody ever arrested because of their involvement in the Kennedy assassination besides Lee Harvey Oswald?
Well, that would be the only person who was arrested would be Clay Shaw in New Orleans, but no, nobody on the scene at the time. Now, they did stop they called them three tramps who were behind the Texas School Book Depository, but they were released. They were interviewed and released. So no one has really ever been brought to justice for this part of this. And the interesting thing is, like you say, there were a number of people who pretended to be Secret Service agents or were in police uniforms, and there just has never been any curiosity by anyone in law enforcement about who those people were. Where did they came from? What were they doing there?
Jim, I'm sure you're asked this question many times when you go out to do public appearances and give talks on the JFK assassination. Why should anyone care about who killed President Kennedy here, now, in this day and age?
Well, I like for people to, I'm a history buff, and I think it's important for people to know their true history, to know what really happened. In order to understand how we got to this point, we need to know, what happened in the past, and maybe that will help us avoid mistakes. Plus, the same organizations that put this assassination conspiracy together, I think they're still in operation. They might have different people in charge, but they're still in operation, and heaven only knows what they're up to these days, because I don't think it was, a one-time thing. We're going to kill the president. No, I think it emboldened them when they got away with killing the president. They said, hey, we can do pretty much anything we want and get away with it. I'd like to put a stop to that. And I think if we, can start looking at who killed Kennedy, we can start unraveling what these other organizations have been up to in the meantime.
Jim, do you think that the people who were responsible for the assassination of President John F. Kennedy were also responsible, or are also responsible, for the assassination of Bobby Kennedy?
That's a great question. There's just something really odd about the death of Bobby Kennedy. About a month before he was killed, he mentioned, he never should have said this, but he mentioned if he were to hold the office of president, he could find out who really killed his brother John. And I think he never should have said anything like that publicly. Of course, it's easy to have 20/20 hindsight, but I think that might have had something to do with his death. And more and more people, when they look at Bobby Kennedy and his assassination, there's just something really funny that happened there. It really doesn't look right.
No way. Jim, do you think that there's evidence out there today, or that is in possession of the government or anyone else, that could actually solve this murder?
I do. I think there are a couple smoking gun pieces of evidence out there. One of the things I did during my research, this is a little complex, Rob, but I submitted what's known as a FOIA, or a Freedom of Information Act request, with the FBI for information related to Lyndon Johnson and the Kennedy assassination. And this took several years to get a response from them. And when I did get a response, I had a huge stack of papers. It's just unbelievable how many reams of stuff they sent me, almost all of which was just junk mail. In the middle of it, though, was a memo from J. Edgar Hoover. This was back in the 1960s. As it turned out, this memo discussed the fact that the FBI had a spy or a mole in the Soviet KGB who had always, according to the memo, always given accurate information. This mole said that the KGB, as you might expect, wanted to know what really happened in the Kennedy assassination. It didn't look right to them, the Warren Commission report. And so when they did their own investigation, they uncovered, and this is what this official FBI memo says, they uncovered evidence proving that Lyndon Johnson gave authorization for the death of President Kennedy. Now that's just, that just blows the doors off this whole issue of who assassinated President Kennedy. I've been trying for, at least 10, 15 years, ever since I got this information, to work with the Russian government to release that evidence, because I think everyone needs to see it. Everyone needs to hear it. Apparently, as best I can gather, at some point, the KGB or somebody in the Soviet Union was able to wiretap President Johnson. I have no idea if it was while he was visiting someplace or if it was in his car or whatever it was. And he apparently incriminates himself. Can you imagine if we could get our hands on that tape? I've talked to the Russian diplomats at the UN, at the Russian embassy in Washington, D.C. I've been to the Russian consul in Seattle. And at that level, they've actually been helpful. They seem like they want to help me get that information released. I've been told there are KGB archives and there are KGB secret archives. And this information is in the KGB secret archives. And as soon as it goes up to another level in the Russian government, I hit a stone wall. I just, no cooperation whatsoever. They don't want to release that.
Jim, is it possible that this is just fake news? That it never did happen and it was somebody trying to throw the investigation off by putting in a little bit of information that the Russians have done their own investigation and they know who killed President Kennedy?
Well, Rob, anything is possible, but again, this memo comes from the office of J. Edgar Hoover, and this person had always given accurate information, so I think it at least should be looked at. And
Jim, hold on to that thought, Jim. We've got to take our final break here. And Exonation, Jim Koepkeas, our special guest. We're going to continue talking about this memo when we return. Wow. I can't believe all this. This is why this is a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. It's a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. And I'm Rob McConnell, and we're coming to you on Hometown Radio, Classic 1220, here in the X Zone.
Nobody knows you. Nobody shows you the way that I do.
I'm Rob McConnell, and welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Today on the X Zone, the Great Lakes Triangle of North America. Found in the heartland of North America, these landlocked yet connected lakes, which eventually empty into the Atlantic Ocean, have become the scene of more mysteries involving ships, aircraft, people, UFOs, ghosts, and phantom ships than the Bermuda Triangle. 1/16th the size of the Bermuda Triangle, Lady John Graves Simcoe was the first European to chronicle the strange orbs of life that have been seen above and below the waters of Lake Ontario. First Canadians tell of great cities which surrounded the Great Lakes where men flew without wings. The Great Lakes Triangle of North America, one of the world's greatest mysteries, right in our own backyard.
All my friends know the low rider. The low rider is a little higher.
And welcome back. This is the X Zone on your hometown radio 1220. You can listen to us online at www.classic1220.ca. Jim Koepke is my special guest. We were talking about when we last left before the commercial break about the memo that Jim received in reams and dreams and dreams of papers from a FOIA, that's a Freedom of Information Act request in the United States, on information pertaining to former President Lyndon B. Johnson. Jim, what did you feel like when you saw this information in print, in your hands, sent to you by the United States government?
I could have fallen off my chair, Rob, when I read it. I mean, this is an official document from the FBI, from the United States government. This isn't something anyone made up. And I have been told that I was the first person to discover this document. In the last couple of years, other people have discovered this information too. Mm-hmm. So it's out there, but nobody seems to know what to do about it. I mean, like I say, I've been trying for more than 10 years to work with the Russian government. I've gotten some pretty terse responses from them. It's really hard to communicate with them. It can take months to send a letter to Moscow, and it can take months to get a response from them. But basically, they've told me the same thing over and over, which is, we don't want to talk to you about this. But I keep trying.
Yeah, before we went to the break, I also asked you the possibility of this being fake news. But like you said, you've got it in print. It came from the government in reams of paper requested by you in a FOIA. With this information, Jim, it's in your book, and listeners can get a copy of your book at Amazon. It's called Chasing Ghosts. Have you ever feared for your life, or that your life was in danger because of the digging that you're doing into this case? A case that many want forgotten, and yet so many deserve to have the answers.
Well, I have been threatened a few times by people who know how to threaten. I actually was able to interview a former CIA director, Richard Helms, and I discussed all this information with him, and he told me, I believe his exact words were, "You need to stop this investigation right now. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" And I took that as a pretty thinly veiled threat. And again, if Oswald was the lone assassin, why would a CIA director care what I was doing with my spare time? So that was worrisome. And the other thing is, with this information we were talking about that the Russian government has, if I ever were to get that, I would immediately put it online. I would immediately share with news organizations, because holding a bit of information like that, my life wouldn't be worth a nickel anymore if I'm the only person who holds it. So I would immediately share it, because people deserve to know.
Exonation, Jim Koepke is our guest. He's the author of Chasing Ghosts. And, Jim has been researching the Kennedy assassination for more than 20 years. His work even has been reviewed by Oliver Stone, and apparently he was very impressed by your work.
He had some very nice things to say about it. Yeah, he thought it was very enlightening and very thorough. And, I just gave a presentation a week or so ago, and one of the people in the audience was a 30-year homicide veteran. He was a detective in homicide. And he came up to me afterwards, and he told me I had done a great job investigating this, very tenacious, very thorough.
Sure.
So, yeah, I've gotten some nice compliments from people.
Jim, is it possible that the Warren Commission has suppressed evidence?
Oh, I think so. Absolutely. But I think that's actually pretty well known if you look at it. They did not want to follow certain leads that would take people to the truth. They suppressed those leads. They tried to focus on really just cherry pick information that would incriminate Lee Harvey Oswald and ignore everything else. Their investigation was really a joke. I can't believe anybody would really defend the Warren Commission as being a legitimate investigation.
Let me ask you this, Jim. Let us say, getting back into the X-Zone time machine, that we went back to the days of the Warren Commission, and you, Jim Koepke, were in charge of it. How differently would you have run the Warren Commission, or as it would have been called, the Koepke Commission?
Well, first thing I would have done is hire some professional, experienced homicide investigators, people who had, successfully prosecuted murder investigations. So people who work for police departments or maybe people in the FBI, and just give them free rein. Go out there and find out what really happened. And this is, when the case is still warm. Now it's a pretty cold trail, but back then I think we would have found out in a very short order if we had professional investigators who wanted to know the truth.
But why wouldn't the Warren Commission use their resources, the top federal investigators in the United States? Why didn't they just do that? Why didn't they not let the investigation proceed as a regular, like you say, homicide?
It seems pretty clear that they wanted to cover it up for whatever reason. And now remember, the person that Lyndon Johnson put in charge of this was Allen Dulles, who John Kennedy had fired. So why would you put someone in charge, that had been fired for screwing up the Bay of Pigs invasion? So the whole thing just stunk from the very get-go. And yet there were some people on the Warren Commission report who were coerced into signing it because they did not agree with what the conclusions were.
Jim, let's fast forward to 2023. How different do you think the investigation into the assassination of President Kennedy would have been conducted if it would have been conducted today?
Well, there would be so much more open sources of information with the internet. When someone had a suspicion or someone had a lead, they would, post it on the internet, and they would get a lot of interest, millions of people, and it'd be very hard for the media to shut down and control all the people are. Just because, that's one of the good things about the internet is you just can't shut people down. You can't control the flow of information like you could back in 1963 when you really only had 3 news networks.
When you were writing your book, Jim, and doing the research, did you work with any other investigators on the case?
Not really, no. I kind of did my own thing. It seemed like most investigators, they just cherry pick information to support their preconceived theory, and I wanted to just find out what was really happening. So I was open to any and everything.
Besides the memo that we've been talking about that you received from the FOIA, was there any other part of the investigation where the hair on the back of your neck just stood up and you said, "Holy cow, how could this have been missed"?
Well, there is, and I'm not trying to be mysterious here, but I'm promised not to reveal people's identities. I actually spoke with somebody who worked in the Nixon White House. Now, Rob, do you remember back in the day there was a mysterious 18 minutes of audio tape that was deleted?
Oh, I sure do, yeah.
Well, this was a surprise to me, but he told me that there were automatic backups of all those tapes made, and that he had possession of that at one time. And that 18 minutes of tape, Nixon is discussing the conspiracy that killed John F. Kennedy. And that's why they deleted the 18 minutes. But there's a backup of it, and somebody still has possession of it. And I've been trying to get that person to confirm or deny that. And so far they haven't denied it, which makes me think they really do have that tape. You imagine if we could get access to that audio tape, what that would mean to hear a president, Richard Nixon, giving detailed information about the conspiracy to kill Kennedy?
But that all makes sense if, after learning that Gerald Ford, doctored up the evidence, and that Gerald Ford was the president or the vice president under Nixon, who, when President Nixon was booted out, impeached, goodbye,
yes,
salut, au revoir, get the hell out of the White House.
Yeah.
It was Ford that exonerated him. So, it does, there's something here that just hasn't been fully disclosed. And I think if anybody can do it, Jim, it's you.
I'm trying, Rob, and I'm going to keep at it.
Jim, I've got about 1 minute left. What are your final thoughts for the X Zone Nation tonight?
My final thoughts would be just, in my opinion, tell people don't believe anything you hear in the mainstream media. I mean, that's not to say everything they say is wrong, but just try and understand, are they trying to push a narrative here? Are they trying to control your thinking? Are they giving you the facts, or are they telling you what to think? I think a healthy mistrust of the powers that be is a good thing.
Jim, let our listeners know where they can get a copy of your book, Chasing Ghosts.
It's on Amazon.com.
Jim, I want to thank you ever so much for joining us. And do me a favor, Jim. If you get any more information about the Kennedy case, or if you finally do get something from the Russian government that you want to blab, if share with the world to protect yourself, give me a call. We'll get you right on.
You got it, buddy.
It's been nice talking to you, Jim, in regards to your family, and thanks so much for being here with us in the X Zone on your hometown radio, 1220.
Thanks, Rob.
Take care, Jim. X Zone Nation, Jim Koepke has been our guest tonight, and I've had the pleasure of knowing Jim for a number of years. He's a great investigator. He's also a great author. He's the author of Chasing Ghosts, my research into the Kennedy assassination. I'll be back tomorrow night here in the X Zone as we continue our investigation into the world of the paranormal and the science of parapsychology. So for tonight, X Zone Nation, I want to thank everyone for listening. You can always send me an email to xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. To my senior producer and wife, thank you, sweetheart, for all your hard work. Craig West here at the X Zone Broadcast Network Master Control. Thanks, Craig. And I'll be back tomorrow night as once again we search for the truth. Because this is a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. It's a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. So until tomorrow night, X Zone Nation, please always remember to keep your eyes to the sky and your heart to the light. So from our home to yours, take care, have a nice night, and always, always remember you're listening to the X Zone on your hometown radio, Classic 1220.
Want to take me home. I know